Did you know that this pose was improv? Macaulay Culkin, playing a young Kevin McAllister, was never specifically told to keep his hands on his face after he put on the aftershave in the original scene. But when he did, it reminded the crew of the famous painting, The Scream, so they kept it in. And I'm going to scream if I get one more comment saying that I look like Macaulay Culkin. In the year or so since I started doing YouTube, I've gotten quite a few comparisons. I've been called Shaggy, Mark Zuckerberg, don't love that. But the one that I've gotten by far more than any of the others is Macaulay Culkin. And I'm assuming they specifically mean his long hair phase where everybody thought he was on drugs and starving himself. Is this what you think of me? Actually, hold on, he's got kind of a swoopy thing going on with his hair. Let me see if I can recreate it. Is it working? But honestly, I don't really mind being compared to Macaulay Culkin because Home Alone is an absolute holiday classic with some wild and frankly kind of scary stories behind its production. So today, I'm going to share with you 15 shocking facts about Home Alone that you probably didn't know as I take a break from the usual cocktails to make one of Home Alone's classic meals. Mac and cheese? A giant bowl of ice cream? No, milk and pizza. Today, on Mixing Media. So in the movie, they order from Little Nero's, which isn't real, but is probably based on Little Caesars. So I got myself a Red Baron pizza. It's not delivery. It's just better than Little Caesars. For the record, I am using soy milk because I still have to film the rest of the video, and that's just not gonna happen if I drink real milk. So let's go ahead and give this a good old try here. A little bit of pizza, a little bit of milk. Disgusting. Let's get started with number one. Macaulay Culkin was not the only person to play Kevin McAllister. Being only 8 years old, they weren't going to send poor little Macaulay sliding down the stairs into what is certainly the wall. If you look, that doesn't line up with the doorway at all. So instead, they recruited stuntman Larry Nicholas, who was roughly Macaulay's size, but much, much older. He was about 30 and, most importantly, much more experienced. And while you can't really see it in the sledding scene, if you look at the scene where he escapes his house via zipline to his treehouse, you can kind of tell that's not Macaulay. But you would have been able to tell even more in the scene where the car almost collides with Kevin, so they had to use Macaulay Culkin for this stunt. So to avoid mowing down Macaulay Culkin with a giant van, instead they filmed the scene in reverse and the car is actually backing away from him. And I mean, it worked out pretty well. Even knowing it was shot in reverse, I still can't really tell. But speaking of putting people in dangerous situations, fact number two, the spider that Kevin places on Marv's face could have killed him. Originally, they were going to use a realistic prop spider, but the director decided that it wasn't realistic enough, so they called for Barry the Spider. That was his name. And this prompted Daniel Stern, who was the actor that played Marv, to ask two questions. First, was Barry trained? To which the handler replied, tarantulas are tough to train, but he had been working with them for about a day, so no. Which then prompted Stern to ask, if Barry's not trained, is he at least devenomed? And apparently devenoming Barry would have killed him, so no, he was also venomous. So that scream you hear, that is real pure terror, but apparently tarantulas have no ears, so that was not enough to scare Barry into biting Marv. And after going through all that, Stern revealed that really the scarier part of it all was then having to hit Joe Pesci with a crowbar. Though I don't know about that, because I mean, just look at the way that leg dangles in his mouth. Ugh, God. I hate spiders. And let's not forget the kid that did it, Kevin McAllister, who, fact number three, was almost not played by Macaulay Culkin. Though the part was specifically written with him in mind, there was a dispute between the writer John Hughes and the director Christopher Columbus. And if those two names sound familiar to you, that's because Chris Columbus directed the first two Harry Potter movies, and John Hughes is just a legend. He made Breakfast Club, or one of my childhood favorites, Beethoven. But he also wrote the movie Uncle Buck, where he had previously worked with Macaulay, and that inspired him to write the role of Kevin McAllister specifically for him. But Christopher Columbus disagreed. He wanted to hold regular auditions, so they auditioned about 400 different kids, and at the end of the day, still went with Macaulay. Who, number four, was bitten so hard by Joe Pesci that he has a permanent scar. This happened in the scene where Harry and Marv catch up to Kevin and hang him on the coat rack, and Harry's threatening to bite off all of his fingers. And I guess Joe Pesci took that a little too much to heart and bit him so hard during rehearsal that it broke the skin and he started bleeding. Which is really not too surprising, because he kind of method acted this whole thing. He was cold at best to Macaulay on set, and sometimes just plain out mean. So much so that one time Macaulay asked, "Why do you never smile at me?" To which Joe Pesci replied, "Shut up." There's actually this one quote from Joe Pesci where he said, "Macaulay gets pampered by a lot of people on set, but not me," and I think he likes that. Doubt. Big old doubt on that one. I think it'd be pretty hard to like somebody when you're 8 and they almost bit your finger off. And the scene where this happens takes place in Old Man Marley's house, which, number 5, along with the McAllister house, are real houses in Winnetka, Illinois that actually both sold this year for millions and millions of dollars. The McAllister house specifically sold for $5.25 million, which makes me wonder, how do the buyers feel about owning one of the most famous private residences in all of America? I mean, there is a Lego set of their house. If anybody wanted to plan a heist, this would be the perfect model to do that with, which honestly would probably be pretty worth it, because these people can afford a $36,000 a month mortgage, which also means they probably have enough money to pay off Kevin's hotel bill from Home Alone 2, which, number 6, is about $6,000 in today's money. Let me give you a rundown. Kevin stayed one night in the Grand Suite at the Plaza Hotel, which back in 1990 would run you about $1,100, but today costs you a whopping $3,480. Add on to that about $2,000 of room service, money for ice cream and toys, and you're looking at about $5,917. Not a cheap bill, especially when, number 7, Macaulay Culkin only made $100,000 off the first Home Alone movie. Now, the reason he didn't get paid too much for Home Alone is because they weren't really sure how well the movie was going to do. They didn't have high hopes, but as soon as it started taking off in the box office, it got approved for a sequel, Home Alone 2, for which Macaulay Culkin was paid $4.5 million, an amount of money that he would have all to himself a lot younger than you would expect, because in 1995 he wiped both of his parents' name off of his trust fund and it was solely in his name. And the reason he did this is because his parents were going through a separation and he wanted to use the money to help fund his mom's custody battle because he didn't want to go with his dad. But that's sad, and it's Christmas, so moving on to number 8. Home Alone is connected to Friends. When Monica and Chandler buy a house towards the end of the series, the view out the window is actually the same as the view from the McAllister house, because they used old Home Alone stock footage for the show. And Friends isn't the only show it's connected with, it's also connected to National Lampoon's Christmas, which, number 9, Chris Columbus was supposed to direct, but ended up doing Home Alone instead because he backed out of it after Chevy Chase, quote, treated him like dirt. Chris Columbus was in desperate need of the work at the time, but after 2 meetings with Chevy, he called up John Hughes to tell him that he just couldn't do it. And he's not alone. Chevy Chase is notoriously hard to work with, especially on Community, where Donald Glover, aka Childish Gambino, accused him of making racially insensitive jokes in between takes in order to throw him off. And he pissed off Joel McHale enough that he punched him so hard his shoulder got dislocated. So yeah, Chris Columbus was pretty happy with his decision to go direct Home Alone instead, until some controversy came up. Number 10. After Home Alone's release, writer John Hughes was accused of stealing the concept for the movie from a 1989 French film called Deadly Games. To be clear, Hughes denies having ever even heard of the movie at all, which I kind of believe him because it was a pretty small international film, but they still got caught up in a legal battle. And as for the movie itself, it's kind of like Home Alone if it was a lot less fun and a lot more realistically violent, which, number 11, is something shared by one of the times that Macaulay Culkin reprised his role as Kevin McAllister in adulthood, as a serial killer. This happens in the show Drivers from Jack Dishel, which you can check out here on YouTube, but Macaulay Culkin plays an Uber driver who is dealing with his childhood trauma, understandable, and who somehow can't drive, though he can still defend his car from a carjacker in a very Home Alone fashion. And when the carjacker comes to, he finds himself tied up in a basement where Kevin McAllister emerges from the shadows to torture him. Pretty dark. Unlike his Uber Eats ad where he orders some carolers, which I did not realize you could do and I might have to try, though I definitely find the concept of carolers as gig workers a little dystopian. Just like this other ad where he fully automates his attack on Harry and Marv using Google Assistant. And in this ad, you can see him watching the movie Angels with Filthy Souls, which, number 12, is not a real movie. Angels with Filthy Souls and its sequel from Home Alone 2, Angels with Even Filthier Souls, though very convincing, only exist within the Home Alone movies, though I would argue the line,
"Keep the change, you filthy animal,"
has had more impact on pop culture than a lot of real movies. But another thing that was fake was Buzz's girlfriend, because number 13, Buzz's girlfriend was actually the art director's son dressed as a woman. The reason they did this is because they thought it'd be too humiliating for a real young woman to get insulted like that, but I'm sure it just rolled right off the back of the art director's son. But number 14, one very much real woman, Scarlett Johansson, got one of her earliest roles in Home Alone 3, which, bonus fact, nobody watched. People really only care about Home Alone 1 and 2, but number 15, depending on the country you live in, it might not even be called Home Alone. In Argentina, it's called Oh, the Poor Angel, and in Italy, it's called Mom, I Lost the Plane. But my personal favorite is Poland, who has a very strong affinity for Home Alone, or as they call it, just Kevin Alone in the House. So those are my 15 facts about Kevin Alone in the House, and I got a lot of this information from a Screen Rant article, so I'll throw that down in the description. But I know this video was a lot different than my normal anime content, so let me know down in the comments if you liked it. And if you didn't, I got a One Piece video coming up next. But with that, I'm Austin, go watch some Home Alone, and I'll see you here next time on Mixing Media. Bye-bye!